Hello, Sarah of SEK Handmade here, and today we're going to talk about pattern testing. Yay! In my first video about pattern testing, we talked about what is pattern testing, why would you want to pattern test, and how to find a pattern test if you're interested. The next video, we talked about things to think about before volunteering for a pattern test and some tips for how to get chosen for that pattern test you'd really like to be a part of. In my last video, we covered once you get chosen for a pattern test, what are some things you need to consider and some procedures you should go through as you're testing a pattern. And today we're going to talk about giving feedback and promoting a pattern once you have completed a test. Lots of tips and tricks here, so let's go. Giving feedback is one of the most important pieces of the pattern testing process. If you do a wonderful test and you give beautiful pictures, that's really nice and like an extra bonus for me as a designer. But your feedback is what I'm really looking for. So let's talk a little bit about, first, I should say, some designers will give you some really specific things that they want feedback on. Make sure you go back and reread their first communication with you, whether it was through email or some other form, to make sure that you're ticking off all the boxes of the information that they want. But sometimes designers will just say, give me feedback. As I said previously, that's how it was for my first pattern test. And since I wasn't a designer, I was completely lost at what type of feedback might even be helpful. And so I'm going to share with you some ideas of feedback that might be helpful so that you can give the most and best feedback possible, especially if you're in the situation I was in where there isn't a real specific list of things that the designer needs. Here are lots of suggestions of feedback that you could give to be really helpful to the designer. First, though, I want to talk about how you give your feedback. I find that pattern testers are either one of two things. They are ready to get down to business and give you all the feedback and be blatantly honest and super like all the things. Or they're very timid. They don't want to make you upset. They aren't real sure if that was actually a problem or just a little confusion with them. And so maybe they just won't say all the things. Here's the thing. I want to encourage you to be a little bit of both. Designing a pattern is such a personal process. It's like you're giving a little bit of yourself out into the world. And so when people are unkind about their feedback or even just maybe a little blunt, it can feel kind of yucky. But what I'm not saying is don't give the honest feedback. You are doing no one any favors by not bringing up the pieces that you have concerns about. So here's my trick to getting a good balance. I start every email of feedback that I give with a thank you. Just a simple thank you so much for allowing me to test your pattern. Then I say some of my favorite things about the pattern. I really loved the instructions you gave on how to work that stitch. They were super clear and really helped me work the pattern. I love the way this hat is just the perfect drape for a slouchy hat. I love the way the sweater is oversized and cozy. So I say a thank you, I give a compliment, list some of the things that I really liked about the pattern. I am a stickler for honesty. And so I will not tell you something that's a lie. If I say, I love that it was big and oversized, I actually love that it was big and oversized. And I encourage you to do the same. You don't need to fluff them up with all this fake stuff that you don't really mean. But there's something about everything that's positive, right? So I really encourage you to start your email that way. Then let it fly. Give them all the detailed feedback you can. It is up to the designer to choose which pieces they decide to change. I have had lots of pattern testers say to me, it's my preference to have this note listed twice. It would have been helpful to me if you had bolded something. And sometimes, especially if a couple people say, it would have been really helpful to have a photo tutorial for this, or having this noted again in the pattern and not just in the notes would have been really helpful. If several people say that, then man, that's a key to me that maybe that's something that would be helpful to my broader audience. But sometimes people will say, like, it's my preference to have the stitch counts at the end of each page, each line in bold. That's a formatting thing. And to me, the most important part is having all my patterns be uniform. So it's up to me as the designer to process all of the feedback I get from all of the testers and decide what things are critical changes that have to be made for the clarity of the pattern, and what things are maybe just some preference that sometimes make a lot of sense, but other times don't fit the format of how I format all of my patterns. And it's important to me to have some uniformity there. And so I may take or leave some of that stuff that's just more preference. That does not mean that I don't want you to give that feedback, though. As you are giving your feedback, if you don't have a lot of direction on things to give feedback on, I would first list your statistics. All right. So tell me what yarn you used, the name of the yarn, the brand of the yarn. If you want to go crazy, give all the statistics about the weight, the fiber content, all of those things. Maybe not quite as necessary, especially if you're using something that's easy for the designer to look up if they're not familiar and they're curious about it. So tell them what yarn you used. Tell them what hook you ended up meeting gauge with. That can be really helpful. And then give the statistics of your project. How much yarn did you use? If it's different colors, list the yardage for all of the different colors. If you want to know how to do that, we talked about it in my last video. So check that out. I'll link that below, as well as the blog post that goes with it that has all of the formulas and whatnot, and a place for you to download a free printable with all that information as well. So list your yardage and then list your measurements of your final project. That can be helpful too. If my hat was supposed to be 10 inches wide and 8 inches tall, let's say, just pulling numbers out of the air, 10 inches wide and 8 inches tall, and you measure your final hat and it is 10 inches wide and 9 inches tall, and then I noticed that you used more yardage than I thought, well, that's because your hat was taller. And so all that information is helpful for me to sift through what is most important and all of your feedback. So give the statistics first: yarn you used, hook you used, measurements of your project, yardage that you used. Next, be specific about any changes. I like to break this up into two pieces. Any changes about grammar or things that don't sound right in the pattern. So like I have a little description at the beginning of mine. If I've put a you instead of a your, if I've, every once in a while, like I have at the end of mine, share under this hashtag. Sometimes I have the hashtag wrong. Sift through all of those and list those out. And it is super helpful to me. People have different preferences on how they do this, but it's really helpful to me if you say like grammatical issues, page 1, you instead of your in second line. or third sentence or whatever. The more specific you can be about where that is in the pattern, the easier it is for me to find that and see if it needs to be changed and then to change it. So listing all of that out by pages is super helpful. If you can say page 7 under description of blocking, you say blanket and we have a shawl. That's super, super helpful. After you list all of your grammatical errors, then go ahead and list all of the errors that are in the pattern. Friends, even if these have been discussed in the chat, if there's a chat going on, even if they've been listed in the chat, please send them again in your feedback email. Sometimes, for me personally, I check into those chats when I'm out and about, picking the kids up from school. We may be at the park and I notice there's a lot of chatter going on in the tester group and I think, oh gosh, I better check in and make sure everything's okay. And I may give an answer to, yes, that was wrong. I am not at home, and so I can't change the pattern right there. So it is super helpful to me if you restate that in your notes so that I make sure I catch all of those things in the pattern. So even if it was stated in the chat, highly recommend resend it in the email. And just like with the grammatical errors, the more specific you can be about where that error is located, the easier it is for me to find and correct. So say on page 7, row 26 of the pattern, it says double crochet 7 and it should be double crochet 8. That really helps me find that and make the changes. So, like I said before, after you've shared that maybe more technical stuff, it is perfectly fine for you to share some personal preferences that you have about the layout of the pattern or the way things are written. This can be helpful feedback to the designer, especially if several people make a similar suggestion. It would make me think maybe that's worth making a change that I might not have thought of in the past. But keep in mind that these are personal preferences, and it's great to say things like, I think it might have been helpful, or it might have been helpful to me if blah, blah, blah. Not, you should really change number 7. It's confusing. And it's all just about good communication and being as polite as possible. So, be honest with the fact that you realize that these are maybe some personal preferences and share them and, kind of say, I would prefer, I really like to see, I find it helpful, take it or leave it sort of thing. So go ahead and share those personal preferences, but just be aware that a designer may or may not make those modifications that are more personal preference. My last tip is, and this is maybe just a personal preference for me, but I really like it when testers are giving feedback if they respond to the original email that I sent instead of sending a separate email. And here's why. And this, again, may just be me. When my computer organizes my email, it organizes all of the emails and replies to that email in the same spot. And so when I try to wait until I have feedback from all my testers, and then I go through all of it all at once, because this helps me notice like, oh yes, that another tester already noted that. And so I don't need to go make that correction because 5 people have said that. Or 3 of my 10 testers said this one part was confusing. I need to go back and really make sure that's clear. And having all the emails there together makes it really easy to compare feedback between testers and to make sure I've checked on notes from everybody. The other thing is, unless the designer has specified something different, if you can, send your photos in that email as well. A lot of times I tell testers that I need 2 high quality images. If you take a few more and you would like to send some extra to a designer, most designers don't mind having a few extra options. Do keep in mind though, designers don't need 200 pictures. Edit down yourself, and then the designer can edit down which pictures they like as well. But if a designer has 20 people on a test and every tester sends her 20 pictures, that's a lot of pictures for her to sift through to decide what she would like. So just kind of keep those things in mind. And then again, check back on that original email and make sure that you have completed all of the requirements. I ask that my testers create a project on Ravelry. And so while that's not going to be a response to my email, it is one of the things I expect out of my testers. And so read through that email again and make sure you've ticked all the boxes of the expectations that the designer has asked before you just say, I'm all done. Let's talk about the dreaded and uncomfortable situation of what if you can't finish a test. I'll be honest with you, I have been there. It is a hard place to be in, even if you have done all the things that I suggested in my second video. You have check to make sure you're going to have enough time, you've got all your supplies on hand, or you think you can get them quickly. Every once in a while, there is a snag that just makes it impossible for you to finish a test. I have had testers get sick. I have had natural disasters hit their house. I have had pets pass away. I've had elderly family members become suddenly in need of a lot of care. Guys, we are people. Life happens, and a lot of those pieces can be completely out of our control. If you cannot complete a test, you need to communicate with the designer. Here's the thing. Every time someone cannot complete a test and they come to me and are honest with me, there are no hard feelings. None whatsoever. So it can be hard to fess up to the fact that you're not going to get done. But the sooner you can let a designer know that it's not going to happen, I had to have my appendix out. Surprise! Didn't know that was going to happen. I was not testing at the time, but if I had been, once I was feeling well enough, it would have been a great time for me to just shoot the designer a message and say, hey, had surprise surgery. Don't know if I'll be able to complete the test. It doesn't mean I'm definitely not going to complete the test, but the sooner you can communicate that, the better. Designers, depending on the situation, can maybe extend the test a little bit for everybody, can extend the test a little bit for you. But no matter the situation, the more upfront you can be with a designer and the sooner you can communicate with them about the possibility of not being able to complete the test, the better it is for everyone. It's a hard conversation to have, but this is one of those times where honesty really is the best policy. And so communicate. The very worst thing that you can do is to just disappear. And I've had it happen. I have had testers who completely disappear on me, who I send out the test, they communicate for a little bit, they fade away, and then the test is supposed to be done. There are no notes. I communicate with them, they just ignore me. As a designer, that is the very worst feeling. And so be proactive and communicate with the designer if you can't test. Some designers will ask that you pay for the pattern if you don't complete your testing obligations, but almost every designer understands that we are human and And as long as you just are open and honest and explain what's going on, almost all of them are going to say, hey, I understand, and it's fine. And then you can leave that test feeling like there were no hard feelings, and the designer leaves the test feeling like at least they were honest with me. Even if it leaves them a little bit in a lurch, it's so much better to have been communicated with than to just have disappeared. So even though it's hard, communicate. Let's talk a little bit about pattern promotion. If you are a pattern tester, one of the most valuable things you can do outside of giving really great feedback is to help the designer promote their pattern. Now, check in again with your testing requirements. Some designers have pattern promotion policies. Some of them want you to share things. Some of them don't want you to share things. Sometimes you may end up on a secret test. I have one going on right now where my testers the test is due today, but because it's for a publication, it's not getting published until the fall. And so I have asked them, do not promote. You cannot promote. It is in my contract that it cannot be promoted until the release in the fall. So read all of that very carefully and know whether you should promote or you should not promote. Again, if you have questions about this, ask the designer. So much better to say, if you're willing to be flexible, what is your preference on this, than to just go forward and potentially share something that was not supposed to be shared. That's another really awkward position to be in. If the designer has not specified anything about promotion, then it's up to you to decide what you're comfortable with. To me, a tester promoting my pattern is really going above and beyond, and I appreciate it every single time a tester shares my pattern. You can share on an Instagram page, you can share in Facebook. Even if the designer doesn't ask, if their pattern is sold on Ravelry, creating a project that is linked to that pattern really helps promote that pattern, because a lot of times if I'm looking at a pattern and I'm a little bit on the fence, I'll go look at projects and see what it looks like when it's made by other people besides the designer. And that can really show a lot of things about the design. So that's a great way to help promote. If you are the type of person who has a lot of tests or are really busy and a test finishes and you want to share right away and the designer doesn't have a preference, that's great. But if you can hold off till the pattern is published, that can be a really great way to support a designer in their promotion of the pattern. As you are sharing the designer's pattern, it is super helpful to use hashtags. Depending on what platform you're promoting on, use hashtags that the designer has asked. That gives a place for people to go and see the design being made again and again, hopefully by lots of people. And it's great to tag the designer and the shop and the pattern if you can. Now that, and this is really going above and beyond, but now that on Instagram, everybody can share links in their stories. If you share a picture of the pattern test that you did and share it to your stories and put a link in there for people to go buy the pattern, oh my gosh, so above and beyond, but so appreciated, because you may have people that follow you who, when they see me tout my pattern, think, yeah, okay, sure, of course you think it's great. But then when a pattern tester comes out and says, I made this, I really enjoyed it, here is a link for you to go and enjoy it as well. Not only does that signal to other people who might want to make it that I'm not the only one who thinks it's great, but also that this is what it looks like made up by someone who's not the designer, and that maybe they would enjoy making it as well. If you're sharing on Facebook, and you can put a link to the pattern purchasing as well. That's really wonderful. I have seen pattern testers who go into different Facebook groups and share their pattern tests that they've just finished up. And let me tell you guys, that is just, like I said, a real step above and beyond, especially if the designer doesn't require this, but it's something you feel passionate about, you enjoy the designer's work, you really want to go above and beyond to support them. There are lots and lots of crochet groups where designers are not allowed to promote themselves, but where you as a pattern tester or as a maker of patterns can go in and say, oh my gosh, I just finished my whatever shawl, and I absolutely loved working on it. It's by the designer Sarah of SEK Handmade. Here's the link to the pattern, and that's totally fine. And again, that just really signals to people that more than just the designer enjoys the pattern, and that there's an audience and a person, a real person, who's not linked to the business that really enjoyed the pattern. And that can be a real encouragement for them to go purchase the pattern as well. Again, only what you're comfortable with, especially if it's not back it up. I hope that if the designer is requiring you to promote in some way, that that's something that was stated up front, and that you assessed whether you were comfortable or not doing that before you started the pattern test. If the designer was not upfront with that and is asking you to do something you're not comfortable with, like sharing pictures of your children. I don't do a lot of children's items, but if ever someone shares a picture of their children with me, I always ask before I use it, if that's something that makes you uncomfortable, someone else, especially a designer with a really large platform, sharing the picture of your child, be upfront with them about that. And then have some flat lay pictures that don't include your child, or like if it's a hat, it's great to take a picture with your kid's head all the way down so you can't see their face, but you see the hat really well. So you can still provide great pictures for the designer to share if you don't necessarily want your face or your child's face shared publicly, but be upfront with the designer about your comfort level in that. And then any choices that you make for sharing are really above and beyond, but I can say as a designer, really, really are super valuable in sharing the work and helping to promote the pattern. So I'll just say, if you have or ever do that for me, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you. Thank you so much for joining me for my pattern testing series. I hope you found all of this information really helpful. If you didn't catch the other videos, I'm going to link to them in the description below, along with other links that might be helpful if you're interested in pattern testing. Be sure to check out my blog too. Throughout the series, I've had a couple freebies for you if you're interested in pattern testing. So check those out and go snag those for free. If you have any questions, I would love for you to drop a comment below. I'm happy to chit chat and answer questions. If you want a more in-depth discussion, sign up for my emails and respond to any of the emails. You're sending them to me, and I'm happy to chat. It is always my goal to help you grow confidently in your craft, and any way I can help with that, I would love to. I hope that you will subscribe to my channel, like this video, maybe share it with a friend, and check out all those links in the description below. Thank you again for joining me, and happy crafting!